Here's Gilbert Arenas, former Arizona Wildcat, not in the top 5.
Gilbert lost his mind.
Gilbert J. Arenas Jr., born January 6, 1982. Before the distractions, before the downfall, Gilbert Arenas was a machine. Second-round pick, self-made star, 60 points on the Lakers. He wasn't handed anything and didn't want to be. He thrived on slights and thrived on being underrated and unexpected. For him, it was natural. And for a while, that chip on his shoulder made him unstoppable. Averaging nearly 30 points a game, dropping game winners from 30 feet out without looking, carrying a franchise on bad knees and still giving you buckets. He was unfiltered, unpredictable, and undeniable. A player who looked like he was writing a Hall of Fame story in real time. Then everything stopped. Arenas didn't burn out, he broke down. 3 knee surgeries in 1 year took away what made him special, and once he realized he'd never be that player again, mentally, he checked out. He'd already signed a $100+ million contract. He knew the Wizards weren't going to build around him anymore with John Wall entering the league, and saw the writing on the wall. Instead of evolving, he just stopped caring. His body quit, his hunger vanished, and with nothing left to chase, the immaturity that always lingered beneath the surface took over, leading him to go out in a way only Gilbert Arenas could. The guns in the locker room, the jokes at the wrong time, the clowning, the chaos, the endless goofing off with younger teammates like Nick Young.
He ruined my life. I tell him that all the time.
The image he's leaned into today, that of an entertainer, not the competitor. But behind all the punchlines is a career that ended years too soon. A career that you had to witness to believe. When Gilbert Arenas was locked in, he was one of the most interesting phenomenons to ever hit the league. This isn't a story about failure. It's about a player that decided he simply didn't care anymore, mainly because he understood what his body was trying to tell him. A story of the side of players that exists but not many talk about. What happens when your body goes before your mind is ready to stop competing? And once that realization hits, you lose your identity entirely. Arenas didn't refuse to adapt, he knew it was over. And once he did, he became everything he was told not to be, leaning into the kid in him that, for good or bad, doesn't take himself too serious. This will be the 100K milestone story about a player that helped shape Stunted Growth. This is the rise and unraveling of Gilbert Arenas, one of the best scorers of his generation. But what happened? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get him. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. Gilbert Arenas was a 6'4" guard born in Tampa, Florida, but raised in Los Angeles, California. He played his high school ball at Ulysses Grand High in the San Fernando Valley, where his flashy game and high-scoring style caught the attention of West Coast scouts. Despite his talent, he wasn't heavily recruited by top-tier programs, in large part due to concerns about his maturity and focus, causing him to slip to a 99th overall ranking spot. He eventually accepted a scholarship to Arizona, where he wasn't even expected to play his first year, much less become a full-time starter. As a Wildcat, Arenas averaged 15.8 points and 3.8 rebounds per game over 2 seasons, helping Arizona reach the national championship game in 2001. But even after that success, doubts lingered about how his game and personality would translate to the NBA, and he ultimately slipped to the second round of the 2001 draft, where he was selected 31st overall by the Golden State Warriors. Stunt number 1 sabotaged his rise before it started. Gilbert Arenas was never supposed to be a second-round pick, coming off a standout run at Arizona that saw him lead the Wildcats to the national championship game and average over 16 points per game. Arenas was projected to be a mid to late lottery pick. His game was explosive, confident, unguardable at times, and physically he had all the tools to be a star. But then came the pre-draft process, and that's where the problem started. In a setting designed to measure maturity, discipline, and focus, Arenas showed up in full Gilbert fashion. He admitted to not giving full effort during drills, believing the testing didn't matter because none of it applies in a real game. Or in interviews, he gave bizarre answers like telling teams he planned to become an international pimp during the NBA's mandatory rookie transition program. Teams were stunned, not just by his lack of polish, but by his seeming disinterest in professionalism altogether. Whether immaturity, arrogance, or just Gilbert being Gilbert, the consequences were real. He plummeted all the way to the second round, taken 31st overall by Golden State. And while Arenas would eventually prove he was much more worth the risk, the slide came at a cost. Second round picks aren't guaranteed roster spots, much less playing time or investment. Gilbert had to claw his way into the rotation, then earn a starting role and eventually fight for recognition most lottery picks get automatically. In the end, the fall motivated him, but it also wasted crucial development years where he could have been given the keys immediately and groomed as a franchise piece from the start. Instead, his growth had to come from the outside looking in. He overcame it, but he also caused it unnecessarily, and that would become a theme. Stunt number 2, prioritize stardom over leadership. When Gilbert Arenas finally broke through, he did it in a way that couldn't be ignored. After signing with the Washington Wizards, he transformed from a second-round steal into one of the league's most lethal scorers. He averaged over 19 in his first year there, then 25, then nearly 30 a night across the next 2 seasons. He hit buzzer beaters, waved off defenders from half court, and made himself into a must-watch performer every time he stepped on the floor. But behind all the flash and scoring outbursts was a player more committed to building his own legacy than lifting his team to something greater. Gilbert wasn't wired like a traditional leader. He didn't inspire his teammates with focus or elevate the group through sacrifice. He was more obsessed with proving doubters wrong, collecting all-star nods, and making sure no one forgot he was once overlooked. His style of play, volume-heavy and often unconcerned with efficiency, reflected a player chasing moments, not necessarily wins. He once bragged about dropping 60 on Kobe in 06-07, but failed to mention the Wizards were 500 that year and swept in the first round. That didn't seem to bother him. The Wizards had talent, with Antoine Jamison and Caron Butler forming a strong trio, but they were never real threats. And a big reason was that Gilbert never truly became a player others could rally behind. He wasn't selfish in a toxic way, he was just centered on himself more than the system. And while it helped him reach personal greatness, it hurt how seriously the league took the teams he led. They were fun, they were unpredictable, but they were never contenders. Gilbert Arenas built a brand, earned a fortune, and gave fans unforgettable moments. But in doing so, he may have capped just how far his teams or himself could have went. Stunt number 3, mentally checked out when the game changed. Gilbert Arenas was only 25 years old when he reached the peak of his powers. By 26, he was averaging nearly 29 points per game and seemed poised to dominate the league for years. But just as his prime began, his body betrayed him. A string of knee injuries, 3 surgeries in less than a year, completely changed the trajectory of his career. And once Arenas realized he'd never return to the player he was, the fire that once made him so dangerous quietly went out. It wasn't that he refused to adapt, it was that he understood there was nothing left to adapt to. His explosiveness was gone, his quickness, his elevation, his separation, all the things that made him unguardable had disappeared. And with them went his desire to keep fighting. He'd already made his statement, he dropped 60 on Kobe, made multiple all-star teams, and signed a contract worth over $100 million. In his mind, there was nothing left to chase. From there, Gilbert's career shifted into something less serious. The locker room gun incident was the final straw, but his disengagement had started long before that. He became more of a sideshow than a comeback story, joking around with younger teammates like Nick Young, playing pranks and leaning fully into his reputation as an eccentric former star. His focus was gone, and with it, so was his career. By the time he left the league, he was no longer the cold-blooded scorer that once haunted defenses. He was a personality, an entertainer, still talented, still sharp, but no longer hungry. And in some ways, that's the saddest part, because Gilbert didn't go out trying to prove people wrong. He went out shrugging, knowing his best was behind him. For many fans, this was disappointing. For Gilbert Arenas himself, it was poetic. All in all, Gilbert Arenas was one of the most fascinating players of his era, gifted, unfiltered, and unforgettable. He didn't go out fighting for one more shot, he went out knowing his body had taken the game away from him and chose not to resist. He became what he always was at heart, a showman. And while his name still rings out today, it's often more for his stories than his stats. His growth wasn't stopped by failure, but by acceptance. A rare talent who knew when his time was up and decided to have fun on the way out. He should have been an all-time great, but knowing what we know now, none of that matters to Gilbert Arenas. Salute, much respect, one of my favorite players ever, but for these reasons, basketball-wise, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.